In 1944, aircraft factories started to produce Yak-9DD, the most long-range Soviet fighter of that time. Its fuel tanks contained so much fuel that the fighter's range increased up to 1,800 kilometers, which was twice as much as of the common Yak-9. Among the pilots, this modification was called the flying tank. In June 1944, the Soviet Yak-9 fighters were covering the Poltava aerodrome, where the Allied bombers made landing in their shuttle raids on the enemy's facilities. The most radical modification, Yak-9U, was introduced in the end of 1944. The upgraded version, identified by the letter U, had a more powerful engine and a better aerodynamics. This enabled the aircraft to reach a speed of 670 kilometers per hour. Yak-9 became the most mass-produced Soviet fighter. During the war years, its production, including all modifications, amounted to 15,500 aircraft. The best proof of the high appreciation of the Soviet fighter could be the words of the German ace Gerhard Backhorn, who said, "I fought against all types of the Soviet aircraft, including those sent by Lend-Lease. I think the best was Yak-9." The German pilot mentioned the Lend-Lease aircraft. That was the name of the program upon which the Allies delivered the so much needed materials, hardware, and food to the USSR. Among other things, the Soviet Union received fighters. The first foreign aircraft entering the air battles on the Eastern Front far back in 1941 was the British Hurricane fighter. The Soviet pilots also flew the famous British Spitfire. The Red Army Air Force was also equipped with various modifications of the American P-40 fighter, the Tomahawk and Kitty Hawk. The most renowned foreign fighter in the Soviet aviation was the P-39 Aerocobra. Developing this aircraft, the American Bell Company designers applied several innovative solutions. The main peculiarity of the Aerocobra was the layout of its power unit. The engine was placed right after the pilot's cockpit. A master rod was going from the engine to the propeller. This allowed to put two large caliber machine guns and a 37mm cannon in the free front area of the fuselage. A perfect radio equipment was another advantage of this aircraft. However, Aerocobra was easy spinning but was hard to get out of the spin. Relevant recommendations to the combat pilots were provided after thorough tests at the Air Force Scientific Institute. Finally, Aerocobra became a real combat aircraft. The Soviet pilots liked it. It was easy to control and quite accessible for the pilots of medium qualification. The soon-to-be three-times hero of the Soviet Union, Alexander Pokryshkin, also flew Aerocobra. He was author of the famous air battle formula, altitude, speed, maneuver, fire. Aerocobra capabilities, its power-to-weight ratio, and firing power helped developing new vertical combat tactics. Close to the end of the war, there appeared a more sophisticated Cobra family fighter, the P-63 Kingcobra. It also served in the Soviet Air Force and remained in service long after the war. In spring 1943, one of the decisive fights for the air superiority was the air battle in the sky of Kuban. Sometimes there were up to 40 air fights a day within a range of 30 kilometers involving up to 80 aircraft on each side. At that time, the enemy noticed appearance of the new Soviet modification of La-5 without the post-cabin fairing. It showed higher combat characteristics and proved itself equal with the German fighters. That was the La-5F with a forced engine. A better view from the cockpit and the availability of the front and back armored glass differed this aircraft from the previous modifications. In the sky of Kuban, the German aviation had the latest modifications of Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf. But the Soviet aviation was no more confused and amateurish as it was 2 years ago. Two equal counterparties faced each other in the sky. In combat actions, the pilots operated their aircraft at full throttle, and there were huge stress loads upon themselves. In order to assess the pilot's ability to control air situations, several experiments were conducted on a specially prepared La-5 fighter of the Flight Research Institute. These snapshots were made during one of those flights. In the cabin is Sergei Anokhin. Behind him, we can see accelerometers showing G-forces. 9G is almost the endpoint for the abilities of both the man and the aircraft. The next fighter version, La-5FN, was put into production in March 1943. Scientists' recommendations on upgrading aerodynamics and thus increasing speed were implemented on this aircraft. The forced engine had direct fuel injection system. The mass use of this fighter started at the Kurskaya Duga battle, where Soviet pilots were opposed by the German Focke-Wulfs. Both aircraft already met in the air fights, and that's where the stakes were put on them. Tough battles showed that in spite of all its advantages, Focke-Wulf 190 was inferior of La-5FN. The Soviet pilots noticed that it was easier to fight against a Focke-Wulf rather than against a Messerschmitt. The Germans knew that as well. Until the very end of the war, Messerschmitt 109 remained the main Luftwaffe fighter. Yak-3 became one of the most renowned aircraft of the Second World War. It joined the combat actions in the middle of 1944. This aircraft combined all the best of its predecessors and became the top of the Yakovlev's piston engine fighter's evolution. Works on the new aircraft started in 1942. Yak-1 was taken for the bases. Aerodynamics was significantly improved, and when the more powerful M105 engine modification appeared, the military urged production of Yak-3. The aircraft had perfect